This isn't a toy, Grandpa. You could hurt someone. The range officer's hand was already reaching for the rifle in James Martinez's weathered grip. The 73-year-old man stood at the 1,000-yard line at Quantico's precision rifle range, his thin frame dwarfed by younger Marines preparing for qualification. "I know how to handle it," he said quietly, his fingers steady on the weapon his grandson had handed him moments before. "Sure you do?" Staff Sergeant Connors laughed, his voice carrying across the firing line. "Let me guess. You shot squirrels back in the day. This is a military precision rifle, not your deer hunting setup." As Connors moved to physically remove the weapon, another Marine called out, "Just let him try, Staff Sergeant. Might be funny watching the old man miss." What none of them knew was that James "Ghost" Martinez hadn't missed a shot that mattered in 53 years, and the logbook in his grandson's pack would prove it. If you believe our combat veterans deserve respect on the range they once dominated, type honor in the comments. James Martinez had woken that morning in the guest quarters at Quantico, his grandson's small base apartment barely big enough for 2 people but offered with the kind of generosity that made James's chest tight. His grandson, Corporal Danny Martinez, had invited him to visit during his scout sniper course, wanted his grandfather to see what he was learning, where he was training. James had agreed quietly, the way he agreed to most things, without fuss, without drawing attention. At 73, he moved carefully, his knees protesting from old injuries that VA doctors had documented but never fully explained. His hands were steady, though. Still steady after all these years, the one part of his body that age hadn't diminished. He dressed simply that morning. Cargo pants, a plain gray t-shirt, worn sneakers. The tattoo on his left forearm was covered by his sleeve, a faded image most people would never see. A crosshair over a skull with dates underneath that spanned 1968 to 1971. Danny had been proud, almost excited, showing his grandfather the range facilities, the equipment, the standards modern snipers had to meet. "It's different than your era, Grandpa," Danny had said, not unkindly. "Everything's computerized now, ballistic calculators, range finders, wind meters. Not like the old days." James had nodded, saying nothing because what was there to say? That he'd made shots without computers that these young Marines would consider impossible. That he'd operated in conditions where technology meant a decent scope and your own calculations scratched in a notebook. That the old days Danny referenced so casually had been rice paddies and jungle canopy where one mistake meant you didn't come home. He kept these thoughts to himself, the way he'd kept most of his service to himself for 5 decades. The range was impressive. Multiple firing positions stretching from 300 to 1,200 yards, steel targets at various distances, observation posts where instructors could monitor every shot. Danny's class was preparing for their final qualification. Young Marines checking rifles, adjusting scopes, loading magazines with the kind of nervous energy that preceded tests that determined careers. James had found a bench behind the 1,000-yard line, content to watch, to see his grandson work. That's when Staff Sergeant Connors had noticed him. "Sir, you need to be in the observation area. This is an active firing line." James had stood, apologized, explained he was Danny's grandfather just watching. Connors had softened slightly. "Okay, but stay back from the line. These aren't toys. Precision rifles, high-powered rounds. Dangerous if you don't know what you're doing." James had nodded, moved back further, but Danny had walked over. Excited. "Staff Sergeant, my grandfather was a Marine. Served in Vietnam. I was telling him about our qualification standards." Connors had looked at James with the expression of someone humoring a situation. "That right? What did you do in Vietnam, sir?" "Infantry," James had said simply, because that was technically true, even if it wasn't complete. "Well, thank you for your service," Connors said with perfunctory respect, already turning away. "War was different back then. Lots changed since the jungle. Danny, eager to share, had pressed on. "Staff Sergeant, could my grandfather watch from the firing line? Just behind me? He's really interested in seeing how we do things now." Connors had hesitated, then shrugged. "Fine, but stay behind the red line and don't touch anything." That's when Danny had made his mistake, his young pride wanting to share something special with his grandfather. He'd pulled out his rifle, a Marine Corps M40A6, the current standard scout sniper weapon, and started explaining the features to James. The older man had listened patiently as his grandson described the scope magnification, the trigger pull weight, the stock adjustments, all the modern improvements. Then Danny, without thinking, had handed the rifle to his grandfather. "Feel the weight, Grandpa. Pretty different from what you carried, right?" James had taken the rifle automatically, his hands finding the proper grip instantly, his posture shifting into a stance so ingrained it was more natural than standing relaxed. His left hand had moved to the forestock, his right to the grip, his cheek finding the stock's position, his eye instinctively aligning behind the scope. It had been pure muscle memory, decades-old training overriding conscious thought. That's when Connors had seen him. "Whoa, whoa, whoa." The staff sergeant had crossed the distance in 4 quick strides. "Sir, put that weapon down now." James had lowered it immediately, but not quickly enough to avoid the scene now developing. Other Marines had turned to look, instructors were approaching, and Connors was red-faced. You don't just hand loaded weapons to civilians on an active range. "Jesus, Corporal Martinez, what were you thinking?" Danny had stammered apologies, but Connors was already reaching for the rifle in James's hands. "This isn't a toy, Grandpa. You could hurt someone." The words had landed with that particular sting of being infantilized, of having decades of experience dismissed as irrelevant. James had kept his voice level. "I know how to handle it." Connor's laugh had drawn more attention. "Sure you do. Let me guess. You shot squirrels back in the day?" Another Marine, a lance corporal named Briggs with the swagger of someone who'd never seen combat, called out from the firing line. "Just let him try, Staff Sergeant. Might be funny watching the old man miss. My grandpa thinks he can shoot too. Puts holes in paper at 100 yards and thinks he's Chris Kyle." The comment drew chuckles from several young Marines. Connors had looked at James, at his worn clothes and grey hair and thin frame that looked nothing like the Hollywood version of a warrior. Something had shifted in the staff sergeant's expression, not quite cruelty, but that casual dismissiveness that comes from assuming you understand someone completely. "You know what? Fine. Let's see what the old generation can do." He gestured to the 1,000-yard line. "You think you can shoot, sir? Prove it. Take one shot at the 1,000-yard target. If you hit anywhere on the steel, I'll apologize for doubting you. But when you miss, you head back to the observation area and let the professionals work." Danny had started to object. "Staff Sergeant, maybe we should—" "It's fine, Danny," James had said quietly. He'd looked at Connors, at the young faces watching with amusement, at the range stretching out before him. 50 years ago he would have felt anger. Now he just felt tired. Tired of being invisible. Tired of having knowledge dismissed. Tired of watching young men who'd never faced real combat treat warfare like a sport. But mostly, he felt the weight of the rifle in his hands and the memory of every shot that had mattered. "One shot," James confirmed, "at 1,000 yards. "One shot," Connors agreed, smirking. "But you've got to do it right. Prone position, proper form, not just standing there like you're at a carnival." James moved to the firing line, lowered himself to prone position with a care that made his knees protest, and settled behind the rifle. The young Marines were gathering now. Qualification paused, everyone wanting to watch the old man fail. Connors was explaining to the other instructors what was happening, his tone making it clear this was entertainment, not serious shooting. James pressed his cheek to the stock, his eye finding the scope naturally. Through the glass, the 1,000-yard target appeared. a steel silhouette, man-sized, barely visible to the naked eye. He didn't touch the scope adjustments Danny had set. Didn't check the wind meters or ask about atmospheric conditions. His right hand found the bolt, chambered around with movements so smooth they looked choreographed. Around him, he heard whispers. No way he hits it. Probably can't even see it. This is embarrassing. Someone should stop this before he hurts himself. James blocked them out the way he'd blocked out everything that didn't matter for 5 decades. His breathing slowed, automatic, his heart rate dropping into that zone where your pulse doesn't interfere with your aim. He read the wind, not from instruments, but from how the heat shimmer moved across the range, from how the grass bent 400 yards out, from instincts built on thousands of shots when electronic aids didn't exist. His finger found the trigger, and for just a moment, he wasn't on a range at Quantico. He was in a tree line outside Hughes City, or in elephant grass near the DMZ, or on a ridgeline overlooking a trail where the wrong people were moving supplies to kill Americans. He exhaled half a breath and pressed the trigger. The rifle cracked, the recoil absorbed perfectly by his body position, and 1,000 yards downrange, the steel target rang with a sound like a bell. Dead center. The range went silent. James worked the bolt, ejected the brass, cleared the weapon, and engaged the safety before standing. Every movement textbook perfect. He handed the rifle back to Danny without looking at Connors. "Your rifle shoots a bit left at distance," he said to his grandson quietly. "Might want to adjust the scope 2 clicks right." Staff Sergeant Connors stood frozen, his expression cycling through disbelief, confusion, and the dawning realization that he'd made a significant miscalculation. Lance Corporal Briggs, who'd suggested letting the old man try, had gone pale. The other instructors were pulling up spotting scopes, checking the target, confirming what everyone had heard. "Center mass," one of them called out. "First round, cold bore, 1,000 yards. Perfect hit." An older voice cut through the stunned silence. "Staff Sergeant, what's the holdup on my qualification range?" Everyone turned. A gunnery sergeant in his late 40s was approaching, his weathered face and command presence marking him as someone who'd seen multiple deployments. His name tape read, "Reyes." Connors snapped to attention. "Gunny, we had a civilian on the line. The situation is—" "I saw the situation," Reyes interrupted. His eyes had locked onto James, studying him with an intensity that made the air feel heavier. "I saw the shot too. Cold bore, 1,000 yards. Center mass. Haven't seen shooting like that in—" He stopped mid-sentence, his eyes dropping to James's forearm where the sleeve had ridden up slightly, revealing the edge of the faded tattoo. Reyes went completely still. "Sir, are you a scout sniper?" James met his eyes, saw recognition there, saw understanding that went beyond the shot everyone had witnessed. "Long time ago, gunnery sergeant. Different era. Different war." "What unit?" Reyes's voice had changed, professional curiosity replaced by something deeper. 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, 1968 to 1971. The effect on Reyes was immediate. His entire posture changed, his expression shifting to something between reverence and disbelief. "You're from the Ghost Company era, the Hughes City snipers." It wasn't a question. James nodded slowly. "We didn't call it that. We just called it work." Reyes turned to Connors, and his voice carried an edge that made the younger staff sergeant straighten unconsciously. "Do you have any idea who you just patronized?" Connors shook his head, confused. "Gunny, he's just a Vietnam vet. I was showing respect. Just a Vietnam vet." Reyes cut him off. "This old man you were mocking is from the most legendary sniper unit in Marine Corps history. They operated during the heaviest urban combat America has faced, in conditions that make anything we've seen in Iraq or Afghanistan look easy. No ballistic computers, no laser range finders, no support infrastructure, Just a rifle, a scope, and skills that we spend years trying to teach today. He looked back at James. Sir, what was your confirmed count? The range had gone absolutely silent. Every Marine, every instructor, every student was listening. James hadn't talked about his numbers in decades, hadn't wanted to reduce human lives to statistics, hadn't wanted to become a story people told at bars. But standing on this range, having been dismissed and mocked by young men who thought warfare began with their generation, he felt something shift. 96 confirmed, he said quietly. Another 38 probable that couldn't be verified. The number hung in the air like a physical thing. In the modern Marine Corps, a sniper with 10 confirmed kills was considered highly experienced. 20 was legendary. 96 was almost incomprehensible. Jesus Christ, someone whispered. Reyes's jaw was tight. Sir, what was your longest shot? Verified. While 400 yards, M40A1 rifle, iron sights at night. Target was an NVA officer. Took 3 hours to set up. Waited until he lit a cigarette. The light gave me enough to make the shot. James said it without pride, without embellishment, just stating facts. Probable longest was maybe 1600, but we never recovered the target to confirm. Different time, different rules. Reyes turned to his students, his voice carrying command authority. Listen up, Marines. You're looking at the kind of shooter we build legends around. The kind of operator who did with iron sights and Kentucky windage what we struggle to do with $10,000 of electronics. Staff Sergeant Connors, you want to tell me again how the old man doesn't know how to handle a rifle? Connors looked like he wanted to disappear into the ground. Gunny, I had no way to know. You had every way to know, Reyes said harshly. He handled that rifle like it was part of his body. His stance was perfect, his breathing was textbook, but you saw gray hair and civilian clothes and assumed incompetence. That's a failure of respect, Staff Sergeant. That's a failure to recognize that the men who came before us literally wrote the manual we're teaching from. He faced James fully. Sir, I apologize on behalf of this range and these Marines. What happened here was disrespectful and unacceptable. James shook his head slowly. Gunnery Sergeant, they didn't know. Can't blame people for not knowing history that happened before they were born. With respect, sir, yes I can, because part of being a Marine is understanding the legacy we inherit. Reyes pulled out his radio. Captain Hendricks, this is Reyes. We need you at Range 4 immediately, sir. We have a situation requiring command attention. 10 minutes later, the range officer in charge arrived, a captain with the bearing of someone who'd spent time in combat himself. Reyes met him halfway, spoke quietly but intensely, kept gesturing back to James. The captain's expression changed multiple times during the conversation, landing finally on something like amazement mixed with concern. He approached James, rendered a salute despite the civilian clothes. Sir, I'm Captain Hendricks. Gunny Reyes just informed me of what transpired here and who you are. On behalf of this range and this command, I apologize for the disrespect you received. James returned the salute automatically. Captain, it's fine. No harm done. Just a misunderstanding. It's not fine, sir, but I'd like to ask, do you still have your logbook? From Vietnam? James hesitated, then looked at Danny, who'd been standing silent through all of this, his face cycling between embarrassment and awe. Danny, in my backpack. The small notebook wrapped in plastic. Danny retrieved it. A weathered green notebook, pocket-sized, wrapped carefully in a Ziploc bag. James handed it to Captain Hendricks, who opened it with the care of someone handling a historical artifact. The pages were filled with entries in faded pencil. Dates, times, ranges, conditions, brief notes about each shot. Every entry was initialed by a spotter or commanding officer, the military's way of confirming kills. Hendricks read silently, his finger tracing down entries that spanned 3 years. March 15th, 1968. Range 100 yards. NVA squad leader. Confirmed by Sergeant Willis, April 3rd, 1968. Range 900 yards. VC sniper. Confirmed by Lieutenant Morrison. The captain kept reading, kept turning pages, kept seeing dates that marked some of the worst fighting in Vietnam's history. You were at Hughes City. You were part of the urban sniper operations. Yes, sir, James said. That's where most of my numbers came from. Buildings made good hides, lots of targets. Hendricks looked up. Sir, this logbook belongs in the Marine Corps Museum. This is primary source documentation of scout sniper operations during one of the most significant battles in Marine Corps history. James took the notebook back gently. It belongs with me, Captain. It's not a trophy. It's a record of people who died. I don't need it celebrated. I just need to remember they were real. The range had filled with Marines now, word spreading that something significant was happening. Young shooters who'd been mocking an old man minutes ago were now staring at a living piece of Marine Corps history. Reyes addressed the group. Martinez, Corporal Danny Martinez, front and center. Danny snapped to attention in front of his instructor. This is your grandfather? Reyes asked. Yes, Gunny. And you knew he was a scout sniper? I knew he was Vietnam, Gunny. He never talked about what he did. Never told stories. I just knew he was infantry. Reyes nodded. That's because the real operators never do. The ones who talk weren't there. The ones who were there carry it quietly. He turned to James. Sir, these Marines are in the middle of their final qualification for Scout Sniper School. Would you be willing to observe? Maybe offer some guidance? They could learn from someone who did this when it actually mattered. James looked at the young faces watching him. Connors, who dismissed him. Briggs, who'd mocked him. Danny, who was seeing his grandfather completely differently. Dozens of others who'd assumed age meant obsolescence. I'd be honored, Gunnery Sergeant. The next 2 hours became an impromptu masterclass. James watched the students shoot, offered quiet corrections that improved their accuracy immediately, explained principles of wind reading and range estimation that modern Marines had forgotten because technology did the thinking for them. When Lance Corporal Briggs missed 3 consecutive shots at 800 yards, James asked, "What's your breathing pattern?" "I exhale and hold, sir. That's what they taught us." "Wrong," James said simply. "You're fighting your body's need for oxygen. Exhale halfway, shoot in the natural pause before your body demands the next breath. Your muscles will be more stable." Briggs tried it. Hit center mass. "Holy shit," he whispered. When another Marine struggled with wind calls, James didn't reference the electronic meter. "Watch the grass at 200 yards. See how it's bending. That's your indicator. Wind at distance affects the bullet more, but wind at mid-range tells you what's happening in between. Electronics fail. Grass doesn't lie." Shot after shot, Marine after Marine, James offered corrections that came from a lifetime of knowledge. Not textbook theory, but practical experience earned in situations where missing meant someone died. Staff Sergeant Connors approached him during a break, his face carrying genuine contrition. "Sir, I owe you more than an apology. I judged you on appearance. I disrespected your service. I was wrong on every level." James looked at the young staff sergeant, saw his own reflection from 50 years ago, confident, certain, not yet humbled by experience. "You learned, Staff Sergeant. That's what matters. Just remember that expertise doesn't always look like you expect. The deadliest men I ever knew looked like school teachers and accountants. The ones who looked dangerous usually weren't." As the day ended and qualification scores were being tallied, Captain Hendricks pulled James aside. "Sir, I meant what I said about the museum. Your logbook, your experience. Marines should know this history." James considered it. "Captain, I'll think about it. But understand, I didn't do any of this for recognition. I did it because my country asked me to, and because the Marines beside me deserved someone watching their backs. That's exactly why the story matters, sir. Because you represent what being a Marine actually means. Not the Hollywood version, the real version. As James left the range with Danny, the young corporal was quiet, processing everything he'd learned about his grandfather in a single afternoon. Finally, he spoke. "Grandpa, why didn't you ever tell me? About the sniping? About your record?" James was quiet for a long moment. "Because it's not something to brag about, Danny. Every number in that book was a person. Someone's son, maybe someone's father. They were enemy combatants doing what their country asked them to do, same as me. I remember each one, and that's burden enough without making it a story I tell at dinner. But you are a legend, Grandpa. I'm a man who did his job, survived when others didn't, and tried to live the rest of his life honoring that luck. The real legends are the ones who didn't come home." They walked in silence toward the parking lot, but Danny noticed something had changed. Other Marines they passed weren't just seeing an old man anymore. Word had spread, and young faces showed respect, some nodding, some rendering proper greetings to a civilian who'd earned more than most of them ever would. That evening, in Danny's small apartment, James pulled out the logbook again, ran his weathered fingers over entries he'd made as a young man in a jungle half a century ago. Each date was a memory, each range a story, each confirmation a moment when his training had mattered. Danny sat across from him. "Will you tell me about some of them, not for glory, but so I understand what you carried?" James looked at his grandson, young, eager, about to enter a profession that would ask everything from him, and made a decision. "Okay, Danny, I'll tell you. But these aren't war stories. These are lessons about patience, about responsibility, about what it means to take life from distance and still respect what you've done." They talked late into the night, grandfather and grandson, sniper and student, past and future connected by the understanding that some skills transcend generations, that some knowledge is earned only through fire, and that the quietest voices often carry the heaviest truths. The next morning, James Martinez left Quantico the way he'd arrived, in worn clothes, driving an old truck, looking like any other elderly veteran heading home. But behind him, he left a range full of Marines who'd learned that day what real expertise looked like, that age and appearance meant nothing compared to skill and experience, and that the men who built the Marine Corps sniper tradition were still walking among them, quiet and humble, carrying their history without advertising it. Like my channel, if you believe our combat veterans deserve recognition and respect regardless of their age or how they look. These warriors carry knowledge earned in conditions we can't imagine, skills developed when lives depended on it, and history that shouldn't be forgotten or dismissed. Share this story if you know a veteran who's been underestimated or mocked because people couldn't see past their gray hair to recognize their expertise. Real warriors don't wear their service like a costume. They carry it quietly, with dignity, and the deadliest among them often look the least dangerous. Honor isn't about appearances or modern equipment. It's about skill, sacrifice, and the hard-earned wisdom that comes from doing the impossible when it actually mattered. And remember, the next time you see an elderly veteran at a range or anywhere else, show respect. That quiet old man might have done things you've only seen in movies, earned achievements that would humble you, and carries stories that could teach you everything you think you know.